For your ears only for the week of May 13th and Mother's Day. Hi, Mom. I'm David Alpern.
I'm Melissa Axelberth.
Europe is looking at us. And when the result was made public, I'm sure that in many countries in Europe, it was relief, hope, the idea that at last austerity would no longer be seen as unavoidable.
Socialist leader François Hollande was reflecting more than the usual political ego last week after his election as president of France. All across the financially troubled Eurozone, voters have been rising up against elected officials who march too obediently to austerity commands coming out of thriving Germany. But the opposition of democracy to austerity leaves some analysts worried about a major European collapse that could drag the U.S. economy back down with it.
To consider that possibility, a $2 billion trading loss by the biggest U.S. bank, J.P. Morgan Chase, and the state of the U.S. economy generally, for your ears only, we're joined again by Daniel Gross, economics editor and columnist at Yahoo Finance. His new book is Better, Stronger, Faster, The Myth of American Decline and the Rise of a New Economy from Free Press. Welcome back to our show.
Hey, it's good to be here.
For all the initial worries, Wall Street took the anti-austerity results of elections in France and Greece last weekend with relative resilience.
Yeah, I think, in the case of Greece, we've already assumed for a long time that it's a basket case, that things will never get better there. They've written off a good chunk of their debt. There's probably a lot more to come, and everybody's been taking evasive action about Greece for a couple years now. And with France, ironically, with the socialist elected president, there's the sense that maybe the mood has changed. Instead of doing this austerity, which has been self-defeating and only led to lower economic growth and more financial crises, that there will now be a force at the heart of Europe saying, let's look for something that's a little more expansionary. Let's try to get growth going, because in the long term, growth is the only solution to the problem of unemployment and budget deficits.
And there were reports that German leader Angela Merkel might meet Hollande with some willingness to compromise, if not on the extent of austerity Germany requires to keep supporting financial relief, at least on the time span for it.
Merkel and Sarkozy were really of one mind, so much so that they were referred to as, Merkozy, as if they were like Brangelina at the heart of Europe. We're not going to see a similar mind meld between the two. And I think she looks around and sees that in all these other countries in Europe, the politicians who have implemented austerity have all been voted out of office. We've seen changes in Ireland. David Cameron's not looking so hot in the UK, in Italy. And so it's clear the public is kind of revolting against us, which makes it harder to continue imposing that. And I think, again, that the election in France has really solidified that maybe it's time to think about a slightly different tack. Not that Merkel is suddenly going to come out and say, hey, let's stimulate the economies like crazy, but she has to realize the new political realities.
Barring total chaos, a Greek word, you note, Eurozone financial woes actually work in America's favor, continuing to draw foreign investment to U.S. stocks and government bonds with lower borrowing costs for our Treasury, right?
Whenever something bad happens in the world, people rush to buy U.S. government debt. Even though people were talking about a default, even though our political system is dysfunctional, it's the safest, most liquid asset around. And so we saw the yield on the 10-year bonds drop to 1.9, 1.8%, which means that the government can borrow for very cheap, but ultimately homeowners can borrow for more cheaply, and companies. So they're going to go out and refinance their debt, make their profits look a little better. And this is one of the reasons I talk about it in my book about why the U.S. may not be in such decline. If everybody keeps turning to us for a safe haven, that really redounds to our benefit.
But also your book says they're turning to us for our products, rapidly expanding exports. Give us some numbers on that.
So exports started to turn up in April 2009. They hit bottom, $124 billion a month. They've risen on a monthly basis by 50%. We just got the exports numbers for March, $186 billion. So I like to say, we don't make anything the world wants except $186 billion in agricultural products, planes, machines, and services, tourism, higher education. When people from abroad come here and spend money, that's an export. And as the rest of the world has grown richer, they are showing a willingness and desire to buy what we're selling, whether it's at home or whether they come here to do it.
But there's also entertainment, the movies, the television, the arts that we put out.
People are concerned about the prospects for growth in the U.S. If the domestic economy is only growing 2% and you're saturated here, how do you get growth as a company or an industry? And the answer is to get more involved in overseas markets. You know, The Avengers, that movie that just opened, had a blockbuster first weekend in the U.S. doing $160 million. But it opened up overseas on April 25th and had already done $450 million overseas. Our business models, our products, whether it's Hannah Montana CDs or movies, Starbucks, they travel remarkably well. And in these past few years, when we've been sort of down on the U.S., a lot of these companies and products have really made great inroads into these very large markets overseas where people are, for the first time, having the cash to consume like middle-class people.
The improved state of American business is less obvious in the slow pace of job growth and not at all in wages. You also fault U.S. banks for hoarding record sums since they got big federal bailouts when the economy needs that money to grow. And the banks have been very embarrassed this past week by the situation at J.P. Morgan Chase, where they apparently lost $2 billion in trading that was meant to serve as a hedge against other potential losses. Are you seeing a return to push for more regulation and oversight?
Well, you know, J.P. Morgan Chase was supposed to be the smart bank. Jamie Dimon was supposed to be the smart banker. And the book about him was called Last Man Standing because he was the only institution through the financial crisis intact. And what we saw, this $2 billion loss that materialized on some complex products, really, I think, shakes the confidence in investors in Dimon and should make us think twice about the safety of our banking system. But it also really, gives the lie to this argument that the banks don't need regulation, that they're fine and, they've learned their lesson, they manage their own risk, they have all the incentives to do so. The reality is they take money, they take it from depositors, they take it from the Federal Reserve, it costs virtually nothing, and in ways big and small, they continue to gamble with it. And as long as we continue to be implicated in that, insuring deposits, insuring their debt, and being the sort of last stop when they get into real trouble, we as citizens and as a government should have a real interest in what they do, which argues for more regulation rather than less.
Beyond regulation and oversight, are there incentives to lending that might be tried, especially in the area of mortgages, but others as well? We know rates are at a record low, but it still seems to be so hard for many people to negotiate or renegotiate their terms.
We're at a stage in the recovery where companies of all types, whether it's McDonald's paying more wages, companies paying more dividends, banks being a little looser with credit, they've restored their balance sheets. They have record profits. The U.S. corporate sector had corporate profits of $1.9 trillion in 2011. They've got to give that up a little bit.
Daniel Gross is economics editor and columnist at Yahoo Finance. His new book is Better, Stronger, Faster: The Myth of American Decline and the Rise of a New Economy, from Free Press.
Quote from the news, many economic problems that we face are actually political problems in disguise. That was Renmin University political scientist Zhang Min on China's slowing economic growth because of limits to central planning, party infighting, and high-level corruption.
Next, infiltrating al-Qaeda and watching it spread, for your ears only.